welcome to this special I-24 News Evening Edition. I'm Lucia Arish. The UN General Assembly began 1 week ago and has so far included important speeches, including those of US President Barack Obama, Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, and Syrian Foreign Minister Walid Muallim. Amidst perceived thaw in US-Iran relations, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will take the stage at the UN General Assembly. During this hour, he'll continue Israel's views and concerns regarding Tehran's nuclear program. The speech will mark the end of a two-day diplomatic whirlwind for Netanyahu after yesterday's White House meeting with U.S. President Barack Obama, of course. And in the studio with me tonight, this evening, we have an expert panel, including Jacob Eilon. Thank you very much for coming to the studio. Senior Israeli news anchor, Barbara Opall-Rome. Good evening.
Good evening.
Israel's bureau chief at Defense News, and Yoav Limor, military analyst for Israel Hayom and I-24 News.
Good evening, Mr.
Gentlemen, my lady, thank you very much for coming to the studio. And let's start. What should we expect today? Because Barack Obama tonight, Jacob, has totally another problem on his head. What should we expect from Benjamin Netanyahu after last night's meeting?
Yeah. Well, look, Prime Minister Netanyahu has a major timing problem with the whole thing. Major story in the United States, of course, the government shutdown today. President Obama is going to talk about it soon on national television. The party at the UN is over. The Iranians were there. The phone call was there. The White House meeting was there yesterday. Netanyahu is practically the last one who came to the party. And basically the story is behind us. So he has a major timing problem. And we'll see if after all of this, Netanyahu has something new to, sort of the bomb of last year up his sleeve. So we'll have to wait to see and listen to the speech.
No, I have to say that U.S. President Barack Obama came yesterday after a very, very high anticipated expectations from the world that he will attack in Syria. He didn't do that. And then right now he's facing another problem, which is the big shutdown that the whole world is talking about. So he's not expected, maybe the last conversation that they both had yesterday, it seems that he wanted to put some things out of the table and let me now face my problems inside.
Right. And you have the whole Middle East thing now at this moment a little bit put aside. And this major thing internally in the United States is definitely the focus of the president and the rest of the American politics right now.
So yesterday, Yoav, we saw the conversation between Barack Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And it seems like at the press conference, they had another meeting where Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to explain again to Barack Obama how important it is to still be that Iran's nuclear weapon program should stay on the table. And did he make the point clear?
Big question mark. I don't think President Obama was as open to listen yesterday because of what Jacob was just talking about. But the US and Israel got closer in the past few months. We saw it during Obama's visit to Israel. We saw it yesterday during Netanyahu's visit to the White House. I mean, the American went out of their way to show to give Netanyahu a very warm hospitality. It was not significant to his previous visits to the White House. So bear it in mind when we hear him tonight. He lost the American audience, not because they don't like Israel, but they won't listen to him. Tonight, he might gain the international audience. We have to wait and see. But a couple of years ago, Netanyahu spoke of the Holocaust. Last year, he spoke of the cartoons,
yes,
the bomb. We should wait and see what's going to be the headline of this year's. I hear, those are rumors, whispers, but I hear whispers of photos and of maps that talking that that's what we're going to see.
He's
in the
going
UN.
to take another photos and maps with him.
Something within that includes intelligence, very deep intelligence. There was a deep conversation within the Israeli intelligence forces during the past few weeks. What should they give Netanyahu when he goes to the UN? Some officers were against showing information because it might work against you.
And rightly so, because of the 2003 National Intelligence Assessment. And,
regarding
the US
Iraq, and then Israel was blamed for pulling the US going into Iraq.
There's a lot of skepticism about Israeli intelligence.
At the end, Netanyahu decided, and he forced the Israeli intelligence to go with exposing new evidence showing that Iran is still, despite the smiles and
the
happy
warm
face,
welcoming that they're getting,
still ongoing towards the bomb. That's what he's going to say. He's going into a very harsh speech. It's not going to be a nice speech, not a friendly one. He had advisors saying that go with the wind, with the winds blowing from Tehran, etc. That's not Netanyahu. That's not what we are going to hear tonight. He spoke about it yesterday with Obama, and he's going to do his business. Obama is going to do his business tonight. We're going to see two different things. It doesn't mean that Israel and the US are speaking in two different voices, but this is Netanyahu's show, and he has to do it.
So this is Netanyahu's, yes.
I wanted to just interject that really, aside from the highly publicized White House meeting yesterday between the Prime Minister and President Obama, I would say that probably even the more important meeting was his meeting with Capitol Hill leaders. Senator Menendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and other key congressional leaders. We have to realize, the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, wants to maintain and possibly strengthen sanctions on Iran. And when it comes to sanctions, Congress determines the future fate of the sanctions.
He wants to do it now. And
Absolutely.
as opposed to Obama.
And in that case, Obama is less of an address. Less of an address than Congress.
We will keep on discussing this exact issues that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to talk about, and we are going to see exactly what he's going to talk about. Let's pass right now to the General Assembly in the UN in New York. Let's see what Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, has to say.
His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu of the State of Israel, and I invite him to address the General Assembly. Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I feel deeply honored and privileged to stand here before you today representing the citizens of the State of Israel. We are an ancient people. We date back nearly 4,000 years to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We have journeyed through time. We've overcome the greatest of adversities. And we reestablished our sovereign state in our ancestral homeland, the land of Israel. Now, the Jewish people's odyssey through time has taught us two things. Never give up hope, always remain vigilant. Hope charts the future. Vigilance protects it. Today, our hope for the future is challenged by a nuclear-armed Iran that seeks our destruction. But I want you to know that wasn't always the case. Some 2,500 years ago, the great Persian king Cyrus ended the Babylonian exile of the Jewish people. He issued a famous edict in which he proclaimed the right of the Jews to return to the land of Israel and rebuild the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. That's a Persian decree. And thus began an historic friendship between the Jews and the Persians that lasted until modern times. But in 1979, a radical regime in Tehran tried to stamp out that friendship. As it was busy crushing the Iranian people's hope for democracy, it also led wild chants of death to the Jews. Now, since that time, presidents of Iran have come and gone. Some presidents were considered moderates, others hardliners. But they've all served that same unforgiving creed, that same unforgiving regime. That creed that is espoused and enforced by the real power in Iran, the dictator known as the supreme leader. First Ayatollah Khomeini, and now Ayatollah Khamenei. President Rouhani, like the presidents who came before him, is a loyal servant of the regime. He was one of only 6 candidates the regime permitted to run for office. See, nearly 700 other candidates were rejected. So what made him acceptable? Well, Rouhani headed Iran's Supreme National Security Council from 1989 through 2003. During that time, Iran's henchmen gunned down opposition leaders in a Berlin restaurant. They murdered 85 people at the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. They killed 19 American soldiers by blowing up the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia. Are we to believe that Rouhani, the national security advisor of Iran at the time, knew nothing about these attacks? Of course he did. Just as 30 years ago, Iran's security chiefs knew about the bombings in Beirut that killed 241 American Marines and 58 French paratroopers. Rouhani was also Iran's chief nuclear negotiator between 2003 and 2005. He masterminded the strategy which enabled Iran to advance its nuclear weapons program behind a smokescreen of diplomatic engagement and very soothing rhetoric. Now, I know Rouhani doesn't sound like Ahmadinejad. But when it comes to Iran's nuclear weapons program, the only difference between them is this. Ahmadinejad was a wolf in wolf's clothing. Rouhani is a wolf in sheep's clothing. A wolf who thinks he can pull the wool over the eyes of the international community. Well, like everyone else, I wish we could believe Rouhani's words, but we must focus on Iran's actions. And it's the brazen contrast, this extraordinary contradiction between Rouhani's words and Iran's actions that is so startling. Rouhani stood at this very podium last week and praised Iranian democracy. Iranian democracy, he said. But the regime that he represents executes political dissidents by the hundreds and jails them by the thousands. Rouhani spoke of, quote, the human tragedy in Syria. Yet Iran directly participates in Assad's murder and massacre of tens of thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Syria. And that regime is propping up a Syrian regime that just used chemical weapons against its own people. Rouhani condemned the, quote, violent scourge of terrorism. Yet in the last 3 years alone, Iran has ordered, planned, or perpetrated terrorist attacks in 25 cities in 5 continents. Rouhani denounces, quote, attempts to change the regional balance through proxies. Yet Iran is actively destabilizing Lebanon, Yemen, Bahrain, and many other Middle Eastern countries. Rouhani promises, quote, constructive engagement with other countries. Yet 2 years ago, Iranian agents tried to assassinate Saudi Arabia's ambassador in Washington, D.C. And just 3 weeks ago, an Iranian agent was arrested trying to collect information for possible attacks against the American embassy in Tel Aviv. Some constructive engagement. I wish I could be moved by Rouhani's invitation to join his wave, a world against violence and extremism. Yet the only waves Iran has generated in the last 30 years are waves of violence and terrorism that it has unleashed in the region and across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish I could believe Rouhani, but I don't. Because facts are stubborn things. And the facts are that Iran's savage record flatly contradicts Rouhani's soothing rhetoric. Last Friday, Rouhani assured us that in pursuit of its nuclear program, Iran, this is a quote, Iran has never chosen deceit and secrecy. Never chosen deceit and secrecy. Well, in 2002, Iran was caught red-handed, secretly building an underground centrifuge facility in Natanz. And then, in 2009, Iran was again caught red-handed, secretly building a huge underground nuclear facility for uranium enrichment in a mountain near Coman. Rouhani tells us not to worry. He assures us that all of this is not intended for nuclear weapons. Any of you believe that? If you believe that, here's a few questions you might want to ask. Why would a country that claims to only want peaceful nuclear energy, why would such a country build hidden underground enrichment facilities? Why would a country with vast natural energy reserves invest billions in developing nuclear energy? Why would a country intent on merely civilian nuclear programs continue to defy multiple Security Council resolutions and incur the tremendous cost of crippling sanctions on its economies? And why would a country with a peaceful nuclear program develop intercontinental ballistic missiles whose sole purpose is to deliver nuclear warheads? You don't build ICBMs to carry TNT thousands of miles away. You build them for one purpose, to carry nuclear warheads. And Iran is building now ICBMs that the United States says could reach this city in 3 or 4 years. Why would they do all this? The answer is simple. Iran is not building a peaceful nuclear program. Iran is developing nuclear weapons. Last year alone, Iran enriched 3 tons of uranium to 3.5%, doubled its stockpile of 20% enriched uranium, and added thousands of new centrifuges, including advanced centrifuges. It also continued work on the heavy water reactor in Iraq. That's in order to have another route to the bomb, a plutonium path. And since Rouhani's election, and I stress this vast and feverish effort has continued unabated. Ladies and gentlemen, underground nuclear facilities, heavy water reactors, advanced centrifuges, ICBMs. See, it's not that it's hard to find evidence that Iran has a nuclear program, a nuclear weapons program. It's hard to find evidence that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program. Last year when I spoke here at the UN, I drew a red line. Now, Iran has been very careful not to cross that line. But Iran is positioning itself to race across that line in the future at a time of its choosing. Iran wants to be in a position to rush forward to build nuclear bombs before the international community can detect it and much less prevent it. Yet Iran faces one big problem. And that problem can be summed up in one word: sanctions. I've argued for many years, including on this podium, that the only way to peacefully prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons is to combine tough sanctions with a credible military threat. And that policy today is bearing fruit. Thanks to the efforts of many countries, many represented here, and under the leadership of the United States, tough sanctions have taken a big bite off the Iranian economy. Oil revenues have fallen, the currency has plummeted, banks are hard-pressed to transfer money. So as a result, the regime is under intense pressure from the Iranian people to get the sanctions relieved or removed. That's why Rouhani got elected in the first place. That's why he launched his charm offensive. He definitely wants to get the sanctions lifted, I guarantee you that. But he doesn't want to give up Iran's nuclear weapons program in return. Now, here's a strategy to achieve this. First, smile a lot. Smiling never hurts. Second, pay lip service to peace, democracy, and tolerance. Third, offer meaningless concessions in exchange for lifting sanctions. And fourth, and the most important, ensure that Iran retains sufficient nuclear material and sufficient nuclear infrastructure to race to the bomb at a time that it chooses to do so. You know why Rouhani thinks he can get away with this? I mean, this is a ruse. It's a ploy. Why does Rouhani think thinks he can get away with it? Because he's gotten away with it before. Because his strategy of talking a lot and doing little has worked for him in the past. He even brags about this. Here's what he said in his 2011 book about his time as Iran's chief nuclear negotiator. And I quote, "While we were talking to the Europeans in Tehran, we were installing equipment in Isfahan." Now, for those of you who don't know, the Isfahan facility is an indispensable part of Iran's nuclear weapons program. That's where uranium ore called yellow cake is converted into an enrichable form. Rouhani boasted, and I quote, "By creating a calm environment, we were able to complete the work in Isfahan." He fooled the world once. Now he thinks he can fool it again. You see, Rouhani thinks he can have his yellow cake and eat it too. And he has another reason to believe that he can get away with this. And that reason is called North Korea. Like Iran, North Korea also said its nuclear program was for peaceful purposes. Like Iran, North Korea also offered meaningless concessions and empty promises in return for sanctions relief. In 2005, North Korea agreed to a deal that was celebrated the world over by many well-meaning people. Here's what the New York Times editorial had to say about it. Quote, "For years now, foreign policy insiders have pointed to North Korea as the ultimate nightmare, a closed, hostile, and paranoid dictatorship with an aggressive nuclear weapons program. Very few could envision a successful outcome, and yet North Korea agreed in principle this week to dismantle its nuclear weapons program, return to the NPT, abide by the treaty's safeguards, and admit international inspectors. And finally, diplomacy, it seems, does work after all." Ladies and gentlemen, a year later, North Korea exploded its first nuclear weapons device. Yet, as dangerous as a nuclear-armed North Korea is, it pales in comparison to the danger of a nuclear-armed Iran. A nuclear-armed Iran would have a chokehold on the world's main energy supplies. It would trigger nuclear proliferation throughout the Middle East, turning the most unstable part of the planet into a nuclear tinderbox. And for the first time in history, it would make the specter of nuclear terrorism a clear and present danger. A nuclear-armed Iran in the Middle East wouldn't be another North Korea. It would be another 50 North Koreas. Now, I know that some in the international community think I'm exaggerating this threat. Sure, they know that Iran's regime leads these chants, death to America, death to Israel, that it pledges to wipe Israel off the map. But they think that this wild rhetoric is just bluster for domestic consumption. Have these people learned nothing from history? The last century has taught us that when a radical regime with global ambitions gets awesome power, sooner or later, its appetite for aggression knows no bounds. That's the central lesson of the 20th century. And we cannot forget it. The world may have forgotten this lesson. The Jewish people have not. Iran's fanaticism is not bluster. It's real. This fanatic regime must never be allowed to arm itself with nuclear weapons. I know that the world is weary of war. We in Israel, we know all too well the cost of war. But history has taught us that to prevent war tomorrow, we must be firm today. This raises the question, can diplomacy stop this threat? Well, the only diplomatic solution that would work is one that fully dismantles Iran's nuclear weapons program and prevents it from having one in the future. President Obama rightly said that Iran's conciliatory words must be matched by transparent, verifiable, and meaningful action. And to be meaningful, a diplomatic solution would require Iran to do four things. First, cease all uranium enrichment. This is called for by several Security Council resolutions. Second, remove from Iran's territory the stockpiles of enriched uranium. Third, dismantle the infrastructure for a nuclear breakout capability. including the underground facility at Coman and the advanced centrifuges in Natanz. And 4, stop all work at the heavy water reactor in Iraq aimed at the production of plutonium. These steps would put an end to Iran's nuclear weapons program and eliminate its breakout capability. There are those who would readily agree to leave Iran with a residual capability to enrich uranium. I advise them to pay close attention to what Rouhani said in a speech to Iran's Supreme Cultural Revolutionary Council. This was published in 2005. I quote, here's what he said. A country that could enrich uranium to about 3.5% will also have the capability to enrich it to about 90%. Having fuel cycle capability virtually means that a country that possesses this capability is able to produce nuclear weapons. Precisely. This is why Iran's nuclear weapons program must be fully and verifiably dismantled. And this is why the pressure on Iran must continue. So here's what the international community must do. First, keep up the sanctions. If Iran advances its nuclear weapons program during negotiations, strengthen the sanctions. Second, don't agree to a partial deal. A partial deal would lift international sanctions that have taken years to put in place in exchange for cosmetic concessions that will take only weeks for Iran to reverse. Third, lift the sanctions only when Iran fully dismantles its nuclear weapons program. My friends, the international community has Iran on the ropes. If you want to knock out Iran's nuclear weapons program peacefully, don't let up the pressure. Keep it up. We all want to give diplomacy with Iran a chance to succeed. But when it comes to Iran, the greater the pressure, the greater the chance. 3 decades ago, President Ronald Reagan famously advised, trust but verify. When it comes to Iran's nuclear weapons program, here's my advice. Distrust, dismantle, and verify. Ladies and gentlemen, Israel will never acquiesce to nuclear arms in the hands of a rogue regime that repeatedly promises to wipe us off the map. Against such a threat, Israel will have no choice but to defend itself. I want there to be no confusion on this point. Israel will not allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. If Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. Yet in standing alone, Israel will know that we will be defending many, many others. The dangers of a nuclear-armed Iran and the emergence of other threats in our region have led many of our Arab neighbors to recognize, finally recognize, that Israel is not their enemy. And this affords us the opportunity to overcome historic animosities and build new relationships, new friendships, new hopes. Israel welcomes engagement with the wider Arab world. We hope that our common interests and common challenges will help us forge a more peaceful future. And Israel continues to seek an historic compromise with our Palestinian neighbors, one that ends our conflict once and for all. We want peace based on security and mutual recognition, in which a demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes the Jewish state of Israel. I remain committed to achieving an historic reconciliation and building a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Now, I have no illusions about how difficult this will be to achieve. 20 years ago, the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians began. 6 Israeli prime ministers, myself included, have not succeeded in achieving peace with the Palestinians. My predecessors were prepared to make painful concessions. So am I. But so far, Palestinian leaders haven't been prepared to offer the painful concessions they must make in order to end the conflict. For peace to be achieved, the Palestinians must finally recognize the Jewish state, and Israel's security needs must be met. I am prepared to make an historic compromise for a genuine and enduring peace, but I will never compromise on the security of my people and of my country, the one and only Jewish state. Ladies and gentlemen, one cold day in the late 19th century, my grandfather, Nathan, and his younger brother, Judah, were standing in a railway station in the heart of Europe. They were seen by a group of anti-Semitic hoodlums who ran towards them, waving clubs, screaming, "Death to the Jews." My grandfather shouted to his younger brother to flee and save himself. And he then stood alone against the raging mob to slow it down. They beat him senseless. They left him for dead. And before he passed out, covered in his own blood, he said to himself, "What a disgrace. What a disgrace. The descendants of the Maccabees lie in the mud, powerless to defend themselves." He promised himself then that if he lived, he would take his family to the Jewish homeland and help build a future for the Jewish people. I stand here today as Israel's Prime Minister because my grandfather kept that promise. And so many other Israelis have a similar story, a parent or a grandparent who fled every conceivable oppression and came to Israel to start a new life in our ancient homeland. Together, we've transformed a bludgeoned Jewish people, left for dead, into a vibrant, thriving nation, defending itself with the courage of modern Maccabees, developing limitless possibilities for the future. In our time, the biblical prophecies are being realized. As the prophet Amos said, "They shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruit. And I will plant them upon their soil, never to be uprooted again. Veshavti et shvut ami Yisrael, uvanu arim neshamot vayashavu, ונטו כרמים ושתו את יינם, ועשו גינות ואכלו את פריים, ונטטים על אדמתם, ולא ינטשו עוד." Ladies and gentlemen, the people of Israel have come home never to be uprooted again.
Yeah, that was Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I stopped counting, gentlemen and my lady. I stopped counting after the 30th time, I think, the word Iran.
It was a speech about Iran, not about Israel.
A speech about Iran, not about Israel, not putting any of the Israeli agenda on the table. Iran cross-examining, basically, Rouhani's speech.
Right. No gimmicks here, but he started by, discrediting Iran and Rouhani systematically, saying that Iran is not a democracy. He actually implied that Rouhani was involved with terrorism, oversaw some terrorism activities around the world personally. And he portrayed the whole thing. You have to give it to Netanyahu. Rouhani came to the United Nations, was able to portray himself and branded himself as moderate without doing anything, giving away anything, just saying I'm a moderate, and everybody bought that. And he literally had to shove away the president of the United States, was kind enough to accept his phone call. It's pretty amazing. And of course, it doesn't sit well with Netanyahu, obviously. And then I think it's important to listen to Netanyahu when he laid out the principles which he thinks are the principles, the verifiable principles that will allow, in his words,
to believe Iran.
Right. And this is, by the way, this is not what Obama thinks and not what they agreed upon in their meeting. They did not agree on this issue. And there are 4 points there: that Iran should seize all uranium enrichment, remove the enriched uranium from Iranian soil,
3.5%.
Dismantle the infrastructure and stop the heavy water activity in Iraq. Right. 4 points. This is not American policy at this point. And of course, there are some other points, but the one that is really echoing, I think, around is that Israel will act alone if it needs to, he says. And of course, he says it will save a lot of other people. But if we have to stand alone, we'll stand alone.
He's putting Israel as we're going to be the hero of the world, because if you're not going to stand there, we're going to stand. But no gimmicks, like you said, Yoav. How does the Americans going to accept or to receive this speech from Netanyahu?
Well, as I said earlier, it seems like Netanyahu was addressing the U.S. Congress. And considering the divisiveness in Washington right now, it also, I hope that this is wrong, but it seemed that he was blatantly contradicting Obama, who acknowledged Iran's right to enrich uranium.
For civilian purposes.
For civilian purposes,
right.
But Netanyahu was very clear, no enrichment whatsoever. And then he proceeded to read a quote from Rouhani from 2005. This is very critical. If Netanyahu is reverting to his old ways of circumventing the White House, appealing to the factions in Congress that are against the White House, and threatening again that Israel will exercise its sovereign right to self-defense, I fear that Israel truly will be out there and will be alone and will either have to have a unilateral...
Right.
Yeah.
There's a pending bill, by the way, in Congress strengthening the sanctions on Iran.
Because he kept saying sanctions.
Seems
this is the key word that he was saying. But you're saying if Israel will actually find itself alone, are we capable for such an attack?
Because it's already...
You're bringing the future too close to where we are. I mean, we're not there yet. We won't be there, in my eyes, before the spring of 2014. Israel has to give time to the talks to proceed. We have to give it to the U.S. We have to let Obama do that. It's his policy. We have to let the P5+1 do it. I mean, and then we have to wait and see what's going to be the outcome.
So agree with
it won't happen tomorrow morning.
Did you understand that from Netanyahu's speech, that he's willing to give that?
Netanyahu kept the big stick in his hand. And the threat, he said, a credible threat. But he didn't say, I'm going to do so. He said, if at the end of the process you are not going to do anything, I will have to do something. That's the way I understood it.
It was more of making a case rather than threatening.
And a threat. Yeah, there was a threat.
It was a remote threat. It was not like we are going to attack anytime soon.
But a few points that Netanyahu spoke of Ahmadinejad as a wolf in a custom of a wolf, and of Rouhani as a wolf in a custom of a sheep. Netanyahu was a Netanyahu in a custom of Netanyahu. He didn't change his color. He was Netanyahu. He went there as Netanyahu. Whoever expected him to be different, he wasn't different. He spoke of history as he liked so much. He spoke of the Holocaust as he liked so much. He took Israel and put us in the corner. Everybody hates us, everybody threats us, and we have to defend ourselves. That's classic Netanyahu. That's where he wants us to be. That's where he acts the best. I mean, that takes the best out of him. No gimmicks. That was surprising. No pictures, no maps, no cartoons. I don't know how the world is going to see that, because the world is interested in other things today, but Netanyahu was Netanyahu. And if we have to sum that UN
General Assembly,
of 2013, so Rouhani played his role, and Obama played his new Obama role, finding the new agenda of Obama after Syria. Now he has Iran, and he's the leader of the world, trying to be. We have to see the outcome of that. And Netanyahu played Obama role. Now the ball is totally in the White House. Don't get it wrong. Israel is not going to attack, and Iran is going to keep on enriching, but the ball is in the White House. It's for him and the Congress, obviously, to decide whether Rouhani will get nicer and nicer and maybe weaker, or if he gets stronger. It's up to Obama.
I want to touch a point that to touch the point that Yoav said, that he took the role of the world leader. He took the role of Obama basically in this speech, by saying, I'm going to save the world, and how the Americans are going to get it.
As an American, I can tell you that this
speech,
it fell on deaf ears for me. And when you engage in such a ad hominem diatribe, a personal attack against Rouhani. This is a world body. You deal with statecraft. You have issues. You have concerns. You have complaints. You deliver them from state to state. He was personal. He was defensive. He was argumentative, and
he
again,
showed that he was obsessive.
Right, but
why do you expect him to be someone else?
Who is his audience?
Not
say
only the United States, also Israelis. You have to remember that. It was also directed to Israelis back home in Israel.
Absolutely.
You spoke of American domestic problems. Netanyahu comes back tomorrow to Israel. He has our politics. He has elections for the regional elections in Israel within 3 weeks' time. He has awful economic problems in Israel with the non-budget, etc., etc. That makes him stronger. When you will have the weekend's polls, you will see a much stronger Netanyahu, because he was a strong leader. And I agree with Jacob. It works for him, in favor of Netanyahu.
Every time Netanyahu comes back from the UN with these great speeches, and they are great speeches usually,
usually, why do you say usually?
Because he's a great speaker. Netanyahu is a great speaker.
He is a great speaker, but this one, it wasn't. And I agree with Barbara.
He is a masterful speaker normally. This time, he seemed to be on the ropes when he used that boxer analogy of being on the ropes.
Yeah.
But he gave a great headline about the yellow cake.
You can't have your yellow cake and eat it too.
That's one to remember.
That was classic. Right. But one thing, Jacob, you mentioned a very good point, how this will strengthen Bibi politically, domestically. But the goal of getting rid of the Iranian nuclear threat, I think that he didn't advance that at all.
Let's talk bottom line. Bottom line, we are entering sort of a window of diplomacy here. You may like it, you may not like it, but that's a fact. Obama will give the Iranians some time to check them out. We don't know how much time. By the way, many experts believe that the Iranians are seriously on the ground economically. Their sanctions probably cause them a lot of problems. Some say that they cannot hold for more than a few months. And we have now a period of time where they'll start negotiations, and some say that maybe they'll stall and maybe they're bluffing and so forth. In a couple of weeks, there's another meeting in Geneva where maybe they will be requested to show something. And as Yoav said before, no attack anytime soon.
That's how I see it. When I said the ball is in Washington, I meant that Israel has to work very closely with the Americans. The game is not. One shouldn't have expected Netanyahu to change the world diplomacy vis-a-vis Iran after one speech. It doesn't work that way. I mean, what Rouhani did last week was magic. I mean, it happens once in a lifetime. It doesn't happen every week, and we couldn't reverse that. But Netanyahu now had to go to Obama and work very closely with him. He has to send his people to know what's going on behind closed curtains with the Iranians, because we don't wait for Geneva. The Americans will talk with the Iranians secretly, and Israel has to know what's going on in there and to influence on the Americans and to be able to know, to influence and get the outcome and prevent our potential attack of next year by maybe strengthening sanctions or getting the Americans into a point where they do not give up too easily to the Iranians.
Look at Syria. Look what happened in Syria.
I wanted
I
to
don't know.
make a point.
Let's wait for the outcome.
When Netanyahu evoked Ronald Reagan's trust but verify, when Reagan said that in Reykjavik, he proceeded to sign a STAR treaty that reduced the nuclear arsenal by something like 1,500
With
warheads.
the Russians, with the Soviets.
And Netanyahu, these words that he keeps using, I hope that it won't come to pass, but he could be tripped up on these words, just like you mentioned Syria. Obama was tripped up by drawing a red line that I'm sure he regretted saying that.
I want to go back about one point, about maybe 5% from his speech, which was the Israeli-Palestinian renewal of peace talks.
Right.
I think that, after the Americans putting their foot on the ground about the subject, it was very weird that he didn't take any very big subject and taking a very big part in his speech talking about this subject.
Again, this is Netanyahu classic for the past couple of years. Netanyahu is not very fond of advancing the process with the Palestinians. We know that. And the Iranian issue for him is the major issue. It's also more comfortable for him to deal with it.
He said people may think that I'm obsessive about the Iranian issue, and I have to say, after 95% from your speech is about the Iranian issue, maybe you can come out.
That's the biggest threat to Israel. I mean, it's understood, but I want to look differently at the Palestinian point. I mean, listen to three speeches within the past week. Obama saying that there are serious talks between Israelis and Palestinians, including Jerusalem and refugees. That's Obama. An American president do not lie publicly very often. Then Abu Mazen talks, and he speaks about end of conflict. And now Netanyahu speaks, and he says, "I'm open, I'm into it, etc., etc." Now, I'm not very optimistic because it's very complicated. But Israelis and Palestinians have been talking for 2 months. We see nothing come out of there. We aren't blaming them, and they are not blaming us. I sat here in this studio last week, day after day, when soldiers were killed. You didn't hear a word from Prime Minister Netanyahu or his people against Abu Mazen. 5 months ago, we would have blamed Abu Mazen for personally being responsible for that. What does it mean? Something serious is happening there. I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but they are talking, and both sides are interested in what's going on, not getting out.
Maybe Benjamin Netanyahu is actually...
We all work out of leaks. If someone is interested in leaking something, usually he's interested in that not happening.
Don't forget...
If nothing is leaking out of the doors, it's interesting. It's a point to observe.
Before we're continuing with this leaking thing, we have our I-24 News correspondent Tal Shalev on the phone with us. Good evening, Tal.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, Tal, what are the first reactions about Benjamin Netanyahu's speech?
Well, actually, Netanyahu's speech came at a very unfortunate time, and as you could probably see, the hall was almost half empty, and the U.S. Media is, of course, obsessed with the shutdown and waiting for the U.S. President Barack Obama's speech, but actually everyone was expecting a gimmick, and he didn't give any gimmick this time. He used many rhetorical devices, as analogies, quotes, historical reference, and rhetoric questions. But of course, he didn't give us the usual Netanyahu gimmicks as we're used to in the past 2 years. 2 years ago, he gave He presented Auschwitz maps, and last year he presented the cartoon of Bibi Bomb, and everyone was waiting for some kind of gimmick this year. And this year he actually gave a much more grown-up speech. Some might say even boring, if you could see what was going on Twitter. Some might say even boring. But the Israeli delegation is very satisfied with the speech. They think it was a diplomatic speech saying, and the bottom line was understood, Iran is developing nuclear weapons, and it is not for peaceful intentions. And he laid out the Israeli demands, and I think from the Israeli delegation point of view, this was a very successful speech.
What was the purpose of him asking from the ministers, from his own party, not to speak and not to say anything before he's going on stage?
Well, Netanyahu was worried. As you know, he has some very right-wing elements in his government and in his party that might have created any diplomatic gaps. It was actually, I think, intended to both for the meeting with President Obama yesterday and for the speech today. He wanted to have one clear message. He wanted to control the message and not have to deal with any diplomatic gaps or encounters that some of his ministers or his fellow party members could have created by saying, you know, even just one wrong word could create a big diplomatic gap.
So let's talk a little bit about the, you are in New York, you're actually experiencing what is happening right now with the big shutdown. What is going on about this?
Well, the shutdown isn't really felt in New York. It's more felt in Washington, D.C., which is a whole federal country, but a whole federal city. But in New York at this moment, you can't really feel the shutdown yet, but you can sense the difference between last week's busy week at the UNGA. The whole city was closed up, and today there aren't even barriers to get the UN. The timing of Netanyahu's speech, which was, of course, dictated from his point of view from the Israeli holiday last week, was a bit miserable because he is not getting any attention, both from the UNGA, which is actually closing right now, the high-level meeting of the UNGA, and also from the U.S. media, which is focusing on the shutdown.
Tal Shalev, our I-24 News correspondent in New York, will be back with you in a short while. Gentlemen, one last sentence before we're going on small break. Jacob?
Sure. I'll say this: if we want to, tell our viewers around the world that maybe in this issue in Israel there's a disagreement also as about anything, and many in Israel think that maybe the Iranians should be given a chance. So we
will continue exactly from this sentence. We're going for a 2 minutes break, and we're back. Welcome back to our evening edition. We're continuing this special I-24 News evening edition just after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took the stage at the UN General Assembly. Still with me in the studio is our panel, including Jacob Eilon, senior Israeli news anchor. Thank you very much. Barbara Opall-Rome, thank you. And Israel, of course, your Israel Bureau Chief at Defense News, and Yoav Limor, military analyst for Israel Hayom and I-24 News.
Good evening.
So we just started talking about leakings. We finished talking 2 minutes ago about leakings. He ordered his staff not to say anything, not to even go and have an interview before he's going on stage. Why?
Understood. He wanted one message by one person, and that's the Israeli message made by him. I mean, go back to last week, before he ordered his ministers not to talk. Half of them were in favor of the Israeli delegations remaining in the room while Rouhani speaks. Half of them were against it. They started arguing. He said, enough with that. I'm talking. I'm the only one who is talking. That's my message. I'm going to deliver it, and you're going to obey. Understood. I mean, that's the way it works in the whole world.
But all we know that the U.S. President Barack Obama might not be listening to what Benjamin Netanyahu has.
He knew from yesterday.
He knew from yesterday. We are going live right now to the White House, Rose Garden, where U.S. President Barack Obama is speaking on the U.S. federal government shutdown. Let's hear what he has to say.
In one house of Congress, in one branch of government, shut down major parts of the government, all because they didn't like one law. This Republican shutdown did not have to happen, but I want every American to understand why it did happen. Republicans in the House of Representatives refused to fund the government unless we defunded or dismantled the Affordable Care Act. They've shut down the government over an ideological crusade to deny affordable health insurance to millions of Americans. In other words, they demanded ransom just for doing their job. And many representatives, including an increasing number of Republicans, have made it clear that had they been allowed by Speaker Boehner to take a simple up or down vote on keeping the government open, with no partisan strings attached, enough votes from both parties would have kept the American people's government open and operating. Now, we may not know the full impact of this Republican shutdown for some time. It will depend on how long it lasts. But we do know a couple of things. We know that the last time Republicans shut down the government in 1996, it hurt our economy. And unlike 1996, our economy is still recovering from the worst recession in generations. We know that certain services and benefits that America's seniors and veterans and business owners depend on must be put on hold. Certain offices, along with every national park and monument, must be closed. And while last night I signed legislation to make sure our 1.4 million active duty military are paid through the shutdown, hundreds of thousands of civilian workers, many still on the job, many forced to stay home, aren't being paid, even if they have families to support and local businesses that rely on them. And we know that the longer this shutdown continues, the worse the effects will be. More families will be hurt, more businesses will be harmed. So once again, I urge House Republicans to reopen the government, restart the services Americans depend on, and allow the public servants who have been sent home to return to work. This is only going to happen when Republicans realize they don't get to hold the entire economy hostage over ideological demands. As I've said repeatedly, I am prepared to work with Democrats and Republicans to do the things we need to do to grow the economy and create jobs and get our fiscal house in order over the long run. Although I should add, this shutdown isn't about deficits or spending or budgets. After all, our deficits are falling at the fastest pace in 50 years. We've cut them in half since I took office. In fact, many of the demands the Republicans are now making would actually raise our deficits. So no, this shutdown is not about deficits. It's not about budgets. This shutdown is about rolling back our efforts to provide health insurance to folks who don't have it. It's all about rolling back the Affordable Care Act. This, more than anything else, seems to be what the Republican Party stands for these days. I know it's strange that one party would make keeping people uninsured the centerpiece of their agenda, but that apparently is what it is. And of course, what's stranger still is that shutting down our government doesn't accomplish their stated goal. The Affordable Care Act is a law that passed the House, it passed the Senate, the Supreme Court ruled it constitutional. It was a central issue in last year's election. It is settled, and it is here to stay. And because of its funding sources, it's not impacted by a government shutdown. And these Americans are here with me today because even though the government is closed, a big part of the Affordable Care Act is now open for business. And for them, and millions like them, this is a historic day for a good reason. It's been a long time coming. But today, Americans who have been forced to go without insurance can now visit healthcare.gov and enroll in affordable new plans that offer quality coverage. That starts today. And people will have 6 months to sign up. So over the next 6 months, people are going to have the opportunity, in many cases for the first time in their lives, to get affordable coverage that they desperately need. Now, of course, if you're one of the 85% of Americans who already have health insurance, you don't need to do a thing. You're already benefiting from new benefits and protections that have been in place for some time under this law. But for the 15% of Americans who don't have health insurance, this opportunity is life-changing. Let me just tell folks a few stories that are represented here today. A few years ago, Amanda Barrett left her job in New York to take care of her parents. And for a while, she had temporary insurance that covered her multiple sclerosis. But when it expired, many insurers wouldn't cover her because of her MS. She ended up paying $1,200 a month. That's nowhere near affordable. So starting today, she can get covered for much less because today's new plan can't use your medical history to charge you more than anybody else. Sky-high premiums once forced Nancy Beagle to choose between paying her rent or paying for health insurance. She's been uninsured ever since. So she pays all of her medical bills out of pocket.
And let's try just to understand. You know, we've been talking a lot about the shutdown. Like I said, his mind is completely somewhere else.
Absolutely.
I believe that he wasn't sitting down and listening to Benjamin Netanyahu. Let's try to explain to our viewers what exactly is this shutdown that everybody's talking about.
Well, I think more than anything, it goes to show you again that the American politics has become so divisive that the president, so frustrated, cannot really do much. Cannot do much about it, and it's going really from one point to another, deteriorating as we speak. That's more than anything. It's about politics. It's about bad blood politics. It's about partisanship, and it goes nowhere at this stage.
Are we about to face the subprime crisis in 2008 in the United States, Barbara?
No, I mean, they're going to pass a continuing resolution. They're going to, I would guess within 5 days. I don't think it will last more than that. There'll come a meeting of the minds, and they'll pass a continuing resolution that will stretch the budget out for another year. I mean, this is a serious matter. There's slightly less than 2.7 million federal workers, about 1% of the population, and they're very, very hard hit. But one thing that Obama made clear, and a lot of experts in America they believe that the Republican Party will be hurt more than anything from this whole standoff.
There's going to be some damage to the economy if that continues. Interestingly enough, as we speak, the markets in New York are sharply higher now. So it's another contradiction.
How can it affect us in Israel when the U.S. is facing such a big economic problem?
Well, I don't know exactly how it will affect it. Well, actually, I do. I mean, there will be a lot of U.S.-funded joint programs. Even Israel's annual military aid is taking a 5% hit under sequestration.
But that was understood and agreed before that current crisis. I mean.
And there could be additional hits. And of course, when you have to cut back programs, it makes everything more expensive. So if the Israel Air Force wants to buy F-35 fighters, for example, the price could go up.
But if you go to the immediate crisis, I mean, when the U.S. is in crisis, the whole world is in crisis, especially Israel, which its economy is so dependent on the dollar and the U.S. economy, etc. So it's obvious. I think Netanyahu will come back with that as well from New York, not
You're
only with
mentioning
Iran.
Netanyahu, and we're back to why we gathered here today. Benjamin Netanyahu, just a short while ago, took the stand on the General Assembly in New York. Let's hear what he had to say tonight.
I wish I could believe Rouhani, but I don't. Because facts are stubborn things. And the facts are that Iran's savage record flatly contradicts Rouhani's soothing rhetoric. He fooled the world once. Now he thinks he can fool it again. You see, Rouhani thinks he can have his yellow cake and eat it too.
He can have his yellow cake and eat it too. It sounds like if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck.
Yeah, but there were no big gimmicks, as we said before. There were no big gimmicks in this speech. Netanyahu really tried systematically to sort of take the air out of this magnificent maneuver that the Iranian president was managed to pull out in New York, where he came out as a moderate, came out as the new darling of the international community, of the White House, without giving away anything, without really doing or saying anything. But I'm a moderate. Look, I'm a moderate, and I'm smiling. The question is whether what Netanyahu said today will, come upon any ears in Washington. Well, the meeting took place yesterday at the White House. As we said before, there are some major differences still between the White House and Netanyahu regarding what the sanctions should be, or when the sanctions should be lifted or actually strengthened. And the other question, of course, is what does it mean Iran stops its nuclear program?
Yoav, he also mentioned North Korea. Can we compare North Korea to Iran?
In a way, yes, and in many other ways, no. I mean, it's a different case. It's a different era. There was a different presidents in the U.S. The only maybe way to compare it is by the North Koreans cheating the world and Iran trying to do the same. But if you go to the project, it's a different project. It's a different way that the North Koreans went, and now the Iranians are going on a totally different path. But from Netanyahu point of view, obviously it's the same case. I mean, they have nuclear weapons, and they shouldn't have, if you don't want to repeat the same thing. But Netanyahu ended his Iranian speech by threatening, or by keeping a big stick, saying that if you, the United Nations, the world, are not going to do the job, we might have to do it. We are not afraid of doing it, and we will not do it only for us, the Jewish people. We will do it for the whole of the world. It's a threat, but it's a risk as well. Netanyahu is speaking of attacking Iran for quite a few years now, and his problem might be that his audience could treat him a bit as a cry wolf. Repeating himself, and people won't listen. And that's a danger, because he goes over and over to the same point. Israel hasn't delivered.
What the Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif has been saying.
Exactly.
For 20 years, you've been saying that
you've been threatening the world, and you're not doing anything. So Israel hasn't delivered, luckily, from my perspective, but on the Iranian project. So I don't know how the world is going to see it, whether Israel is re-threatening, re-talking, re-saying the same things. It's interesting to see the headlines in the world.
The military threat becomes less credible with time. Everybody agrees on that.
We should remember one thing. At the end of this story, eventually the wolf showed up. So we should bear that in mind.
Exactly, but he doesn't want the wolf to show up during his term. And at the end, the same world that you're talking about doesn't want to wake up tomorrow morning hearing that there are Israeli jets over Tehran.
Well, I don't know if who really truly believes that, but one thing I wanted to make relating to the shutdown of the government in Iran, a big headline yesterday in Prime Minister Netanyahu's meeting with Obama was that he actually reiterated the words that the military option remains on the table. But that evening, in an address to U.S. men and women of the armed forces, he told them that after more than a decade of extensive contingency operations, we are pulling back from a war footing. So,
that's
the military
Obama's,
threat becomes less
doctrine.
credible with time.
That's Obama's doctrine.
To Syria last month, he threatened, and at the same time he went for a diplomatic act. So,
he's saying something, and then he's always going back. Let's talk a little bit about that, because he's always taking one step ahead and then two steps back. And this is something that eventually might hurt his image.
Or maybe it's a better dancer than a president.
Right. It's possible, but I think that Obama, maybe as opposed to other U.S. presidents, is less concerned about rhetorics and more result-oriented in his own mind. If I have to look for answers to your questions, I would look inside his personality, not inside any big ideology or policy. And I think that deep down, he's a person who would like to find the peaceful solutions, who is more into getting results rather than a lot of rhetoric. And if he can take chemical weapons out of Syria without firing a shot, he would be very happy about it.
Right.
And you know what? The American people would be too.
And even if he has to give Putin credit.
Right. He doesn't mind.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
he doesn't mind. He looks at the bottom line.
I'll surprise you. Israel will be happy as well if he succeeds in that. The question is whether he's capable we are capable of doing it.
The job of Israel, as with Iran, is to be always the one who puts the doubts. And that's what Netanyahu did today.
No, but I go back to Obama. I mean, you asked of his way, you spoke of his way, and I go to the bottom line. Is he capable of delivering in Syria or in Iran? There is a big question mark. I mean, he's not talking to Americans. He's talking to Middle Eastern inhabitants who speak different language and are used to killing their enemies, not to talk to them very nicely.
Even in the speech, we saw that Benjamin Netanyahu was actually, I don't really believe you after promising, so I might end up on my own.
There's one major difference between the Syrian case and the Iranian case, and that's the surprising ally Obama has on the Syrian front, which is the Russians. The Syrian president cannot say no to the Russians. I mean, he can say a lot of things. He cannot say no to the Russians. And if the Russians are on board here, and if they are serious about getting these chemical weapons out, that's going to happen.
Yes, but Jacob, it's not a zero-sum game. With the Syrian case in small scale, but with the Iranian case in large scale, Israel and Netanyahu hinted on that. We have Saudi Arabia on our side, not on the US side.
Right.
We have all the Gulf countries on our side, even Egypt and Jordan, moderate countries were shaking of what's going on in Tehran, what's going on in Syria, etc., etc.
He's basically representing the whole Middle East.
He spoke of new links in the Middle East. He didn't elaborate, but
last week, 2 days after Rouhani's speech and 2 days after the President Obama's speech, Secretary of Defense Hagel and Secretary of State Kerry met on the sidelines with the GCC nations. They had this Security Cooperative Forum meeting, their third since last year, and they were very anxious. The U.S. had to alleviate and try to calm their concerns. There's a great trepidation among U.S. allies in the Gulf. Where is the U.S. headed? Can they rely on the U.S.? And some are starting to hedge their bets. Turkey just signed up for a missile defense system with China.
Would you be surprised if you knew that in Riyadh during Obama's speech they couldn't believe what they hear in Riyadh?
And Bibi is the guardian, the protector of the ambassador, the Saudi ambassador.
It will be interesting to see.
Here we are in the Middle East.
Here we are in the Middle East. It will be interesting to see what the headlines are going to be tomorrow morning in Israel. Jacob Eilon, thank you very much. Yoav Limor, thank you very much. Barbara Opall-Rome, thank you for being with me tonight. We're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, and we're back with the rest of the headlines. Welcome back. And after the Israeli Prime Minister's speech, and we continue with the shutdown. While the UN General Assembly is underway in New York, the United States has begun a partial shutdown of the federal government after Democrats and Republicans failed to reach an agreement on the country's budget. The deadlock between the House of Representatives and Senate could affect the global economy. From our I-24 News, Eli Ochenberg, we have more.
It now appears that the House is not going to do anything to keep the government from shutting down. They've got some jerry-rigged thing about going to conferences. It's Madam President, it is embarrassing.
The big shutdown had begun, and the chaos was not late to come. A short time after Congress failed to break a partisan deadlock, President Barack Obama made a dramatic announcement.
Unfortunately, Congress has not fulfilled its responsibility. It's failed to pass a budget, and as a result, much of our government must now shut down until Congress funds it again.
The shutdown includes non-essential services, and about 1 million people will have to face a forced absence from work and manage without a paycheck. Workers classified as essential government employees, such as air traffic controllers or border patrol agents, won't be affected. It also means a cost to the U.S. economy of $300 million per day. Despite the major damage to American citizens, U.S. troops will still get paid on time, President Obama heard to reassure the forces in a recorded message.
I know the days ahead could mean more uncertainty, including possible furloughs. You and your families deserve better than the dysfunction we're seeing in Congress.
It is the first shutdown of the world's largest economy in 17 years, but analysts estimate it will take only a few days to get back on track.
I expect the shutdown will probably be resolved in the next few days. It won't be resolved immediately, and I think Congress is understood this isn't going to have huge implications for the economy in the short term.
And while analysts are not too concerned, the tourists are disappointed. The freeze of non-essential services also means America's most famous tourist attractions will be forced to close.
When you plan a vacation for 6 to 9 to 12 months and you come to the location that you want to visit and you can't visit it, it's upsetting.
With the high cost in money and morale, it seems U.S. politicians will have to get their act together as soon as possible, leave the political games aside, and take care of their country.
And joining me now in the studio to analyze what exactly this shutdown means is Dr. Alex Coman, expert on value creation at the Academic College in Tel Aviv-Yafo. Good evening, Mr. Coman.
Good evening.
So what exactly does it mean? Because we need to understand how is it going to affect us.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't panic. It's the world's most expensive game of chicken or dare, in the sense that it costs $300 million a day. And basically, it's the president against the Republicans in the House of Representatives. And I anticipate, if people want to bet, I anticipate that the president is going to win. But basically, I do not think that too much is going to happen, in the sense that the security is going to operate, Homeland Security, the financial markets are going to operate. So nothing dramatic is going to suddenly come to a hold down. So I do not think many people, certainly not outside the United States, are going to be impacted by that.
So we just saw that just minutes ago that the stocks in Wall Street are actually up.
Yes.
Which means that good or bad?
Well, I think it's
a good sign.
Basically, if you think about it, Wall Street had a small hiccup, which was not dramatic. I mean, the market fell and then recovered. So there was nothing really, there was not a big run on the bank in the sense that people were panicking. Bonds did not change their value dramatically, in the sense that people were not under the influence that the government was going to stop paying its bonds, or something tragic is going to happen. Basically, this is a situation where the president, who had the majority of the House and the Congress, passed the health, the way he calls it right now, it's the Affordable Care Act. It's a very sexy name, just
instead of Obamacare.
Exactly, instead of Obamacare, which sounds too personal, he said Affordable Care Act, which sounds much better. And so he passed it when he had majority in the House and the Senate, and now he lost his majority in the House, and now the Republicans are basically dragging him through a bed of rocks since then.
So in the next few days, what should we expect?
Well, the funny thing is the following: the Republicans thought that by this shutdown, the president was going to panic. But in fact, the public is very frustrated with the situation. People feel humiliated. And the question is, who's to blame? Obama's point is very easy to present. He says,
the Republicans.
The Republicans are crazy. I passed this thing to enable people. He brought some people in his speech to demonstrate people who have problems. I think there's a much more difficult job to the House of Representatives Speaker to explain why they did whatever they did, because in reality they have no reason. So in terms of public relations, I think Obama, the bigger the suffering, the better President Obama turns out. So I would expect the Republicans to somehow fold in the following days say something that they're concerned about the United States.
So you're saying that they will fall out from the whole thing? So what was it? Just a show of muscles?
Exactly, a show of muscles, but not a very sophisticated one, because they expected the president to fold. And on the contrary, basically, President Obama refused to negotiate with them because he foresaw that he was going to win the public relations battle in this.
Dr. Alex Coman, thank you very much for this. It's going to be very interesting.
Well, on the 17th of October, we're going to see another round of this. So.
Another round, do you think? So we'll probably have you again in the studio to understand what is going to happen in the next round. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And we're moving on the phone with me from New York is our, live from New York is our I-24 News correspondent, Tal Shalev. Good evening, Tal.
Good evening, Lucy.
So it's good to see you.
Well, we're here in New York after the speech.
Yes, so I'm going to just ask you a few questions.
Good to see you too.
I'm just going to ask you a question and then you can continue. We sat down here we heard Benjamin Netanyahu speaking and everybody agreed that this is typical Netanyahu speech.
Well, I think it's actually an atypical Netanyahu speech. I think we heard more grown-up Netanyahu this time. Usually we are used to hearing Netanyahu very attacking and very offensive at the UN. As you know, Netanyahu has a long history with the UN since the days he was an ambassador to the UN in the 80s. When he has this story that he went to visit the rabbi, the very prominent Jewish rabbi Milubavitch, who told him that the UN was a house of lies. And this is one of the things he's been mentioning in his speeches in the recent years over and over again. This time, I think we saw a much more grown-up Netanyahu. He changed his tone. It was a bit more moderate. It was much more calm. It was a very moderate speech for Netanyahu. He didn't attack the international community, as opposed to recent years when he was attacking them for being too appeasing towards Iran. This time he said he supports the diplomatic track, but he still warned them. The bottom line was he presented the facts. He tried to contradict Rouhani's charm offensive from last week and presented the facts. He presented Rouhani's CV. He presented Rouhani's quotes, and he presented Rouhani's statements about the Iranian nuclear program, and presented to contradict all of this. He showed many facts that actually show that Rouhani was responsible to many of and was part of some of the Iranian terror attacks in the recent years, and also presenting evidence that Iran still is continuing with the nuclear program as we speak, and as they are going on with the diplomatic track with the West.
So, Tal, what are the first reactions that you're getting from the Israeli delegation to the General Assembly about the speech? Because it was almost 95% from the speech was basically about Iran.
Yes, that's true. It took Netanyahu only 65 words to cut to the point about Iran, and most of his speech probably, yes, you were right, 90% was about Iran. The Israeli delegation is satisfied with the speech. They think the message got through, and you know, last year he had the BB bomb cartoon, which got the message through. This time, I think the message was clear with words only, that Iran keeps developing nuclear weapons, even though it states that it is not intending to do so. We are hearing some reactions from the left wing here, the American Jewish lobby called J Street. They are disappointed with this speech. They think he didn't dedicate enough time to the Middle East peace process. And yes, he only spoke very shortly about it and actually played the traditional blame game, blaming the Palestinians, not giving enough concessions to come to the process. So basically, from the Israeli delegation, they're satisfied with the speech. Maybe some of Netanyahu's opponents will have some things to say about his speech, but I think in general, this was a much more moderate Netanyahu than we're used to hearing at the UN. Now his challenge will try and give up to convey the message to the American public and to the public opinion. As you know, the shutdown is occupying most of the media, but for the upcoming 2 days, Netanyahu will be giving a media blitz of interviews on main news outlets here in the U.S., trying to get the message out to the American public. According to a poll yesterday on CNN, 75% of the American public supports the direct negotiations with Iran. So Netanyahu will try and warn them and try to get them behind him to keep on the pressure, keep on the sanctions during the negotiations.
Tal, in one sentence, if you're saying that 75% of the American people actually want agreement with Iran, how can he actually really get out and stand aside from this will of the Americans?
Well, I think as Netanyahu said in his speech, it's hard to, when you see the facts he presents, it's hard to believe that the Iranians are not pursuing a nuclear weapon program. So I think Netanyahu will probably keep up with the same rhetoric, talking about the facts, talking about Rouhani's real intentions, and presenting intelligence about the recent developments in the nuclear program based on the International Atomic Agency reports that show that Iran is actually doing things undercover, and will ask the American public, how exactly do you believe they are not pursuing a nuclear weapon?
Tal Shalev, our I-24 News correspondent from New York, thank you very much for this, and we're moving on. This armament team arrived in Damascus today in order to begin to destroy Syria's chemical arsenal following the U.S.-Russian agreement 2.5 weeks ago. Meanwhile, the efforts to bring the Syrian government and the rebels to the negotiation table continues. I-24 News reporter Uli Shapiro has more.
The day after the UN inspection team left Damascus, a new team has arrived, but its mission is quite different. Instead of looking for new evidence of chemical weapons, the disarmament team has come to the region in order to destroy the weapons that are already there, following the Russia-Syria agreements weeks ago.
Nothing like this has ever been tried before, and therefore, in some ways, we are finding our ways. But with the will of all parties, we believe that this mission will be successful.
Diplomatic efforts to resolve the Syrian crisis were at the top of the world attention for weeks, but the atmosphere beneath the surface remains tense. Yesterday, Syria's Foreign Minister Walid Mualem compared the onslaught of the opposition to 9/11, shifting the responsibility to the rebel side.
The people of New York have witnessed the devastations of terrorism and were burned with the fire of extremism and bloodshed, the same way we are suffering now in Syria. How can some countries, hit by the same terrorism we are suffering now in Syria, claim to fight terrorism in all parts of the world while supporting it in my country?
For those who are involved in the conflict, it seems that the disarmament mission is not enough to bring stability in the region. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov doubted today whether the West can bring the Syrian government and the rebels to sit together at the same table.
As for the opposition representatives, this we will need to sort out. We hope until recently that our Western partners who vote to bring the opposition to the conference would be able to do it quickly enough, but they failed to do it quickly. And I don't know whether they will be able to do it by the middle of November.
The disarmament team is starting its mission today with many fears, not only of the dangerous task of destroying the weapons themselves, but also of doing so in an environment of war. And without a political resolution, the situation in Syria is still explosive.
And we're moving on. Russian figures, including 2 members of parliament who double in their free time as pop stars, have put forward President Vladimir Putin for the Nobel Prize for peace for his role in the Syrian crisis. Though Russia has played a large role in arming Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, Putin was instrumental in forging this month's agreement with the United States that calls for the destruction Syria's chemical weapons stockpile. If he wins, Putin would join a dignified list that includes Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, Elie Wiesel, and Nelson Mandela. Mother Teresa, yes. A third-day meeting led by Pope Francis began today in the Vatican with the help of 8 cardinals. The council intends to reform the Vatican's troubled administration and map out possible changes in the church. Here's I-24 News reporter Roni Ben-Bassat with the story.
The Catholic Church derives its power from tradition, but that very same tradition is being put on the table today as a special Vatican Council begins. In a 3-day closed-door meeting led by Pope Francis with 8 cardinals from around the world, the Council intends to reform the Vatican's troubled administration known as the Curia.
There are 2 principal aims: to help the government of the Universal Church and to examine a project of revision on the Apostolic Constitution, Pastor Bonus of the Roman Curia.
Over the last few years, the Church was subject to harsh criticism after a few scandalous affairs, and many have been calling for a shake-up of the Vatican's bureaucracy, which was last reformed 25 years ago. In an interview with the left-leaning La Repubblica newspaper today, the Pope promised to do everything in his power to change the Vatican's mentality, saying it was too focused on its own interests and neglected the world around it. The Argentinian Pope, who has already shown a degree of openness towards abortion, contraception, and homosexuality, takes his name from the saint whose symbol of simplicity, concern for the poor, and for the environment. Perhaps in the future, it will also be associated with liberalism and change.
And now we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes break, and then we'll be back with the I-24 News Daily Debate. 2 minutes, and I'm here again.